Okay, good evening everybody, and thank you for coming out. Welcome to Dundee Libraries. Before we get started on the exciting bits, I'll just say we're not expecting any fire alarms this evening, so if we do have an alarm, then just go out the way you came in, down the stairs, and assemble outside the Victoria Road exit. Now, this event is an Abertay Historical Society event that's taking place as part of Dundee Women's Festival, which is happening just now. And we're going to be celebrating Edith Marnie, who was a place name researcher from Dundee and a former member of Abertay Historical Society herself. Now, I'm Erin Farley, and this is Dave Orr, who is going to be our resident place name expert for this evening. And Dave will be sharing the story of how he came to know Edith and her research through a series of quite impressive coincidences. And at scheduled points throughout the talk, I will pop up and share some folklore associated with some of the place names which Edith researched. So I'll now introduce Dave, who can tell us a wee bit more about Edith herself and her fascinating story.
Okay. Thank you. The idea was really Edith collected a lot of place names in Glen Clover. I'll apologise for the presentation tonight because it's been put together in a bit of a rush, but it's as Erin said, it's a whole series of coincidences, and the main players and the extraordinary women are Edith Josephine Marnie, who was the person who collected these names, and her daughter Edith Wilde. And had it not been for Edith Wilde, none of this would have been happening, because Edith was the one who came in 2011 to Kirriemuir to give a talk to the Kirriemuir Heritage Trust, because when she'd been lighting her fire up in Loch Broom, she'd found a cutting about Peter Pan celebrations in 2010, and she contacted Rob Sargent, who was involved in creating a dance for Sir J.M. Barry's centenary, and because of that she contacted Rob in Inverness. He then told us about her, and she came down and gave us a talk about her memories of Kirriemuir way back in the 1930s. It turns out, I've found out, I only met the woman once, but she had a string of correspondence thereafter. I met her once in Kirriemuir, and a chance discussion, I found out that she'd come up to Kirriemuir regularly because Edith Marnie's brother was James Mackintosh Rattray, who was the local doctor, and it was through his connections with Kirriemuir and the Glens people that she was able to make her connections and collect the place names in Kirriemuir, because she was a resident of Dundee, and as I say, it was really through this meeting with her daughter who gave me a whole load of stories about her memories of early days in Kirriemuir. And as Erin's already alluded, there's a whole series of connections between the Abertay Historical Society, of which Erin and I are both members, and we discovered that Edith Marnie, I understand, maybe the family can correct me, I think she's third lady from the left.
Second row from the left.
Second row from the left. So this is one of the excavations that she was involved with at Farley Hawken, and I believe that there's is an amulet that she found, which is in the Manus Museum. So again, as far as I'm aware, this is a Abertay Historical Society historical production of 1966, and as far as we're aware, that's the only written documentation that was published by Edith Marnie. This is our daughter, amazing Edith Wilde, that I referred to. Both these ladies went to live at Loch Broom in their retirement, and they both lived in the same house in Loch Broom for about 10 years. And Edith was, I think she was 85 when I met her, and she corresponded regularly thereafter. But because of the original idea of just Clover place names, I was going to explain about my connections with Glen Clover and how I met that. But really, I'll move on quickly because the whole thing kind of took over once it got going. This is the map that was used in the book that was produced by Abertay, and it shows the main place names. It's just a layout that doesn't go into any detail of the map of Glen Clover, but I'm not sure whether it would be Edith that had drawn that or not, but that was the publication in 1966. But she goes into great detail about the various places, and as I understand it, she travelled up from Dundee on the bus. She then got the bus from Kerry, Jim Fern's bus, we would know it locally as, and he would drop her off, and there was various stories about when she was looking for various spots, wet areas. She would occasionally fall into a bog, and Jim would say, "Aye, and dinna fall into the bog the next time and get my bus all dirty." That's just a quote from the book, but as I say, I think it gives an illustration. She place names, but it was really anything to do with the people in the glen, the botanical, ornithological interests, and just the study of place names was the key to it, perhaps. But she did obviously, and I think it was through Dr. Rattray, who would be the local doctor for the glen, that she would have enable the contacts that she made. And there's her in later life.
So this is my first sort of folklore interlude, and as Edith Marnie very rightly says in her article, Place Names in Glen Clover, place names are really a window into the life of a place, and they record things that are important about a place. And if we lose local place names, we lose the stories and the histories that are attached to them. And this is why I found it so brilliant going through Edith Marnie's notes and reading the stories and the connections that she records alongside the names as well. And one of the interesting things about folklore and place names is that often, place names describe physical, geological features. But we very often want to come up with stories to explain how these features came to be in the landscape. And we often look at rocks and formations and see a sort of supernatural force as shaping them. One of the place names Edith Marnie recorded in Glen Clover was a place called the Witch's Crack. And this was supposedly a place where landslides were creating a growing cleft in the rocks. And there were many local tales, she says, of the witches who lived there and caused these landslides. Now this ties in with a lot of local legends that we find around Angus. There's a legend of Corrie Whitebents, or the Shot of Bentire, which tells of a village, Bentire, which used to exist at the head of Glendall. And there was a story that this village was destroyed after a local shepherd named Robert Ferguson. In his youth, he refused to give hospitality to an old woman who placed a curse on him in response for this, and as he grew old, he sort of suffered misfortune after misfortune in his life, and eventually the sort of conclusion of this fate was that following a wedding in the Glen, there was a great landslide which crushed the houses there and sort of erased any trace of the people who lived there. And the legend went that the only survivor was one cockerel, and even, this cockerel was seen sort of crowing among the ruins for a month or so before he died himself. So that's quite a tragic story, that we also find witches shaping the landscape in other parts of Angus. There's a stone atop the White Catterthun Hill, which was said to have been dropped by a witch who was carrying it, and when her apron strings broke, then this stone fell to the ground. And the same story was told about the girdle stain at Dunahan. And there is something very interesting going on with witches shaping the landscape. I have a sense that this might connect to a sort of deeper tradition related to the Gaelic Cailleach, the old woman who shapes the landscape, also known as the Carlin in East Coast Scots. And these are both sort of giant women who are very in tune with the power of the earth and shape the landscape either on purpose or through accidental means. And I have a wee suspicion that Carlinhuich Bay near Arbroath might be a Carlin place name, although I can't find a story to connect with that. So I would be interested to see if there's any more that can be found out about that. But I'll now pass back to Dave.
As I say, I was looking at the connections with the Glen and the background to Edith's actual collections. I was just looking back at some of her actual, this is Edith's handwritten notes. It's really quite legible, and it's just general comments. And she says the collection and etymology of place names is not regarded as one of the more dangerous sports or pastimes, but it would be sometimes always with merit that it's the description has seldom gone up to a farm and asked about their field names, but at least one or two collies have rushed out at me as if their sole ambition was to tear me to pieces. If I climb into a field to look at a well or a tumulus or a standing stone, there always seems to be an enormous bull lurking in some corner, which comes across inquisitively, and I've had to seek the safety of the road. The real danger, of course, is giving a wrong derivation. Even recognised place names authorities often disagree and become very bitter about name being too far-fetched, or it couldn't be that, and it should be in the genitive. But it has to be remembered that place names may date back before far more than hundreds of years and originated possibly from illiterate people and were handed orally through many generations, becoming slightly altered at each removal. It's very difficult to say what is the correct word or words that would have been. And there are local differences even today, and in common words, various parts of Scotland, boots, bits, and the Aberdeen beats. What, fat and fit. There's so many local variants that it would be very difficult to be definitive of how it was pronounced in earlier times. So the surest way to look at is to go back to the actual earliest written spellings of the words. And I'll come back to that later on. As I say, she had a real interest in the local place names. And these were recorded and kept by the family, but as I say, we know that the family moved to Loch Broom. And so when Edith, the daughter, suggested that she hand these documents back to me to see what I could make of them, and she felt they should be, because they were local to Kirriemuir and the Glens, she felt they should be in this area. And then she wrote to her brother, Ronald Marnie, who at that time lived in Lincolnshire, and I have his letter here. It is with some relief that I hand over to you these papers on my mother's research into place names in Angus. She had no car to help her travel, and as I said before, she used buses and feet to go from place to place, and it must have been terribly difficult for her, but she had a passion for the subject and indeed for all things old and interesting. Being in an economic family, she did not use A4 or foolscap or indeed writing paper, but any blank paper she could get her hands on. Frugality was the watchword of the day, and waste was a sin. So the paper may seem less tidy, and the information, but the information gleaned the hard way, talking to all and sundry whom she met in her wanderings. From the laird to the labourer, she would seek out the ancient names of fields, places, and try to make sense of it all. She had a marvellous time doing so. Through rain and all weathers, she trod the roads and fields of the glen. After Mother died, her papers were bundled up and stored in the attic, and my sister and I wondered what we should do to make most of all that work, without hoping it would never be lost completely. So meeting up with myself and Kirriemuir was the answer, she thought. And so they thought initially they would have them all transcribed and typed onto A4, but that would have been a huge task. And as I say, it's taken me more than 10 years to get to this point. But it seems that, and again I'll come to this later on, but these documents and this information is now beginning to have a life of its own, and more and more people are interested in them. Again, I'll speak to that later on. Her maps and notes, there are 32 maps, 6 inches to the Mile Ordnance Survey, and notes on 2,620 place names. There's another 340 associated notes, of which these are examples here, and they are quite literally from very smallest scraps of paper, just with one name or a reference or a quotation or something, right through to quite elaborate stories and actual tales, such as the tales that Erin has been referring to. And to give you an idea of the scale of it, these are the maps that are listed that we've identified. You see they vary from the second edition from 1902 up to, I think the most recent one was 1938. But these are the 6-inch maps. These are the number of entries on each page. The ones at the top of the sheet are really the heads of the Angus Glens. So you can see there are sometimes there's just a single page or 2 or 3 pages, and just smaller numbers of actual place names. Whereas when you come down the glen into the Strathmore area towards Forfar area, you start getting much greater numbers. You're getting each field has a name, each little burn has a name. You get prominences and knolls and wells and all sorts of different place names. So that's really essentially what the content of all the notes are. So we've now had these, well, you can see counted and transcribed, but so we're moving on in the sense that we're trying to make some sense of them all. And I'll talk a wee bit about that in a moment. But Erin,
yeah, so another interesting tale which came out of Edith Marnie's notes for me was there's a place in Glendamf which she records known as Baxter's Hussey. Now, without the story that Edith recorded with this, I would never have connected it to the story which it seems to be related to. Because the person who lived at Baxter's Hussey was not in fact called Baxter. He was known as Colin Mackenzie, better known as Knock Baxter, probably from the fact that he lived at this place, Baxter's Hussey. And she says he was present at the building of a lime kiln by Macomie Vore at the Crandart in Glen Isla, which is a story which I really like. So Macomie Vore was a kind of giant, legendary clan chief who lived near Fortar Castle up in Glen Isla. And he was renowned for his size and for his strength. When they had Highland games in the glens, he could throw stones that nobody else could lift. And there are several stones scattered about Glen Isla which are said to have been thrown by Macomie Vor. And he really is one of these kind of half historical, half legendary figures. But one of the stories about him goes that he was concerned that his eldest son was not kind of strong and aggressive enough to sort of live up to this family tradition. So Macomie sat on a chair in disguise. He sat on a big stone, which is also itself now known as Macomie's chair, and he waited for his son to come back home one day. And then he ambushed his son and started fighting him in disguise, so his son didn't know who was attacking him. And the two of them were kind of giving each other a big battering up and down the glen for quite a long time. And eventually Macomie decided that his son was putting up a good enough fight, that he could trust him as his heir. And so he takes his hood off and reveals to his son who he's been fighting, and the young lad is quite astonished. But as part of their kind of family reconciliation, the two of them decide they're going to build a giant lime kiln in Glen Isla. And as they're building it, they choose a really massive stone for the lintel. But it's actually so big that the two of them are struggling to lift it. And so they have a wee break, and as they're having a break, this chap, Colin Mackenzie, comes by. And he sees that they look like they could do it with a bit of help, and he hefts this stone up and puts it into place on the lintel. And Macomie is absolutely astonished at this feat of strength by Mackenzie. And so he gives him, as a token of his appreciation, his red jacket with silver buttons, which was apparently a mark of great honour. The silver buttons were something that could be used to pay for your funeral if you were killed in battle. So this is Colin Mackenzie, and this is how he kind of comes into the folklore. And it's really interesting to find out that there was a house associated with him, as well as the various stones and castles associated with Macomie Vor. And there's also at Padanaram a stone which marks Macomie's field, where John and Robert, sons of Macomie Vor, were apparently slain in a skirmish with the Farquharsons of Brogerig on the 28th of January 1673. So this is another wee connection. And I'll just quickly mention, because it's very hard not to mention this part of the story, that Macomie Vor also had a friend who was a mermaid who lived in a wee loch of Glen Isla, and she used to get all the gossip about the human world from him. But since his death, neither the mermaid or the loch has been seen. So if anyone comes across a wee crooked loch up Glen Isla that wasn't on the map, then that would be very interesting to know about. So pass back to Dave.
So as I say, the question really was, having held on to these maps for some time, and I looked through them periodically and thought, what am I going to do with all this information? How are we going to distribute that? But pure coincidence, along comes lockdown, and I had a neighbour whom I knew, and her and her friends were looking for a wee project to keep them occupied. I said, of the very thing. I'll just bring the wee lists over to you, you can make a start. So that's what they did, but they finished in 2022. They produced digitally files for all of these maps that I showed you that list of. They scanned the maps, then checked spellings, they checked lots of information, and essentially we now have it digitised, so we can now hopefully make more use of it, and certainly one of the other members of the Scottish Place Name Society has expressed an interest in it. But if we go back to looking at some of the Glen names, as I said, it's difficult to determine which are the true meanings of the names. And as just trying to illustrate one case, Tarbuckle, or Tarrybuckle, And of course you can see the Gaelic spelling, because a lot of the names in the glens were either Gaelic or originated from the Gaelic, but essentially they were descriptive, and it obviously referred to the herdsmen who were working in the glen, and that's where the name comes from. But again, Drum is just any sort of ridge, so Drum Beardy would just mean the ridge that presumably the herdsman went out to look at his cattle. He would either be watching the cattle, or that would be the route that he took out to see the cattle. Again, although we started off with place names at Glen Clover, when I was asked to talk to them at the Women's Festival, I thought, well, I have a copy of it there, one of Edith's Notes, again, just a single line on the paper, and she was referring to Clach na Ban, and this is simply translates as the woman's stone. So I thought that might have been a suitable link to this particular talk. But really, one of the things that astonished me, after we'd done the list, the ladies who were doing the transcription of the notes started to find this quite interesting, and one of them researched the Courier, and they came up with this Memories of the Galloping Gran. Now I'm not going to read it, some of you will be able to read bits of it there, but that was the article that appeared in 1986, and it shows her overlooking the loch at Loch Broom. But it is quite astonishing, and the Scottish Place Name Society, the president, came across this, and Memories of Galloping Gran, and he writes, this is the title of an article on Edith J. Marnie written by Colin Gibson, which appeared in the Dundee Courier on 22nd of March 1986, shortly after her death. In this article, Gibson paints a picture, a delightful and dynamic woman with great intellectual curiosity. Gibson writes, she was an authority on place names and spent years gathering her material. Her energy and enthusiasm were unbounded. She would take the earliest bus from Dundee to Kirriemuir, then the Glen Clover bus, and scamper for miles to various farms and outlying crofts. She refers to the large-scale maps of Glen Clover, covered with numbers and reams of notes, all meticulously written. She had amassed a vast amount of information from the older Glens folk. In later life, she developed a strong interest in archaeology and took part in several excavations led by F.D. Wainwright, Horace Fairhurst and David Taylor. Being interested in archaeology and Gaelic, she decided to take a course in these subjects at Glasgow University. So at the age of 70, she matriculated as a student and went to Glasgow to stay in a bedsit and live the student life. She attracted the curiosity of the press, and a reporter waited to interview her after a Gaelic class. But her next class, in archaeology, began at once in another building some distance away. So she simply said to the reporter, well, if you want information from me, you'll just have to run beside me, because I'm in a hurry. And this is the result of the Galloping Gran. And it was then at the age of 75 she moved to Wester Ross, in which she called her dream cottage, built on the shore of Loch Broom. And she lived there happily until her death 11 years later. But anyway, it was the information she collected, which I think is the important aspect. And as I say, it's taking a little time to come to be publicly shared, but I think we're beginning to get to that point now. But it is, I think, by any standard, I think for anyone to get an obituary written by those who know or are aware of Colin Gibson, that's a bit of an honour in itself. And I've discovered that she obviously knew Colin, and they obviously shared notes. So I think the way in which he writes it really captures the essence of this woman. And I think he possibly knew her when she lived in Pitcarrow Road, and as far as I can understand, the house at Pitcarrow Road was a fairly lively place. I'm going to speak a little bit quickly about Adam Watson. Another coincidence. He was Mr. Cairn Gorms. I knew him as the Laird of Kearney, which is in Glen Esk, and I was privileged to work with him on his 2013 book. Now, Adam recorded 16,000 names. That is just, it's an astonishing piece of work. Now, I'm prepared to be thrown out here, because this was a letter to me from Adam Watson 2004, and he's criticising many of the authors of place names articles, and he's saying, I think it's not about Marnie like Dorward and Will. David Dorward wrote a good number of books. He was an academic and he did not visit places, so that was where the criticism came from there. And David Will mainly was in Edsall and Glen Esk area. But he's saying that Edith didn't know enough Gaelic. But of course, what you have to remember is, as I've said, she didn't go to learn Gaelic until she was 70. So when she did the research, she didn't have the Gaelic. So Adam's quite right in his criticism, but I mean, she then had obviously understood that herself and then gone on. Now, this is a really interesting, it's my favourite place name, the Wheen. I don't know if any of you know Glen Clova and the Wheen. You can stop there for an ice cream nowadays. But Edith, in her notes, regards it as a mystery, and she's right in the Heglish. It's the same as Glen Eagles, it's just the church. So she was looking at this McQuinn, but again, we're looking back at this. And this is Timothy Pont's map, 1590s. And if you look very carefully, you'll see it ends with an M, not an N. And this is a later comment from Adam. We'd been talking about Wheen shortly after the Pont display that we had locally, and he was saying, because I'd suggested he'd maybe got it wrong, but he copied it from Edith Marnie. He now learned the lesson. She misread the map. An easy thing to do, but obviously if you're looking at place names, if you've got the wrong spelling, trying to find the origin of the name after that is, well, it's anybody's guess really. So as I say, that's the sort of the moral of the story. I'm going to just take a wee minute out here, and I might not read it all, but I'll read a good bit of this. This is one of my favourite poems. It's called, it was written by R.J. Muir, who was an inspector of schools in Angus, and he calls the poem Topography. O glory, a ye bairns of Angus and the Mearns, and glory for the places where ye live and love and sing, for they run in ready rhyme, then tabulate in time, and in a runic resonance reverberate and ring. Some Angus names are tribal, some were lifted from the Bible. There's Zor and Padanaram, and there's Jericho quite near. Feredith was beaten grandly by King Alpine at Scanley, near where Broody battered Egfrid on the shores of Echton's Mere. There's Unthank and Gowanbank, and the mountain of Blackshank, Braydowney and Balgownie, and the house of Balnamoon. There's Torry and Glasgory, Little Kenny and Finglenny, Ochterloney and Ochrony, and the bonny hill of Doon. There's Mildoon and Pitewin, and the Burnside of Inshuin. There's the house of Balmacuin, Wester, East and Middle Drums. On the coast we have the Slanges, and through a shire a lot of granges, and the city that is known to the universe as Thrums. The hill of Catherthun looks across to that of Dun. Further north there lies the Bogfun, not far from Badentoy. Then go from Ashantully up to the river Glycolly, or by Toole and Brown Jewel to the shootings of Glenmoy. Seek for water Bachnagearn, and for whisky Fettercairn, while Terwhappy and Dunlappy vie in music to the ear. Then leave old Balgillow and Balwillow and Balnillow singing Rossi and Balmossy at the top of Tipperweir. At Clover there's the Milton, and near the shore we find a Hilton. There's Carach and a Charach, and there's lonesome Ochnacree. There's East and Wester Balach, and the Borg of Ochnashallach. There's Monaga, and they tell me of Bodiga in Dundee. There's the Milla in Verwarrity, there's the water up at Carity. There's the Milla in Verarity, Tarfachi and Turbeg. Cross country from Pitcarroll to the Bonnie House of Airlie, or by Ogle and Sharkbogle to Glen Rosen's Craigie Meg. Ardownie and Balrownie call in cadence to Carsgowrie. Pitmudi and Ashloody sing the praises of Abbeythune, while the half-estranged Van Dirn looks and sighs to brown Ben Turn. And Balloony, Dooney, Uni doff their bonnets to Dundee. Broughty Ferry and Balkeary greet the Cotterton and Derry, while Canordy and Balzordy are foils to Moneyfeith, and while tenderness and tealing touches all the soul with feeling, in Vergowrie and Findowrie sink in silence to Drumgeeth. Stracathro and Craignathro clink in chorus to Corathro, Lednathi and Balcathi blind the soul and silken chain. Bogan Caber and Caneva seem to hint at the end of labour, so my Pegasus I'll check, though he's tugging at the rein. It's just a list of place names, but I mean I think it's a wonderful poem, and that was written in 1912. So it's just people in Place Name Society, we do like to make use of the place names, if you like, and I think certainly, as I say, this is again just a further comment from Adam referring to Edith, but he ends, she was a very pleasant, interesting, hospitable old lady when I met her, but not critical. This is just a sample of her handwriting. You can see it's just on a piece of paper torn out of some notebook. She's got the number at the top, which would be the number which she would have written on the map. So that would be how she would record it. So the 56 identifies on the map that she's referring to. And she'd use different colours for different features for field names or for rivers or whatever. She's speaking there about the Balnaboth Chapel and how it got its name, trying to figure out whether it was at the St. Boethius. Again, it's speculation, but I mean, she does that all the way through. Sometimes she will change, but I mean, she's certainly looked back through, I mean, all the old registrums, and looking back for the oldest, because in place names derivations, the oldest version of the name is the most likely to give you the true meaning of it. So, as I say, it's just a sample of our own hand there. I'll let Erin.
Okay. Now, I don't quite know what folklore to tell you about now, but during that poem, there were a few mills came up, including the mill of Glascory. And this connects to another sort of element that comes up quite a lot in place names, and this is wolf place names. So among the names that Edith Marnie recorded, there are several which refer to wolves. There's Wolflaw near Tannadice. There's a place called Ribs of Wolf, which is a very evocative name. And this was another sort of Glenclova place name. But the wolf is an animal which we've not had in Scotland or in Angus for quite a long time. It's been centuries since wolves were hunted to extinction, and pretty much anywhere you go in Scotland there will be a legend about the last wolf and how this creature was hunted. And I think these might have been told in the past as kind of victory stories of how we rid our land of the wolf. But from a modern perspective, they almost seem quite sad stories about how an animal which used to be part of our ecosystem is no longer with us. And one of the stories about the last wolf in Angus and says that this wolf was being hunted by the Laird Robertson of Nathro. He was determined to get this creature, but he could never quite figure out how to catch this wolf. And there was one day when a young servant lassie from one of the farms, she went to the mill at Glascory to grind some corn. And it was a warm day, and she'd been up early and she'd been working hard, and it had been a long walk to get there. So she sat down for a wee rest after she'd finished grinding her corn before she went back to the farm. And she leaned beside a tree and kind of dozed off in the warm afternoon. And when she woke up, she was aware of a presence. And she soon realised that snoring away beside her, curled up on her cloak, was this wolf, the last wolf in Angus. Now, she'd heard all the stories about wolves and how fearsome they were, so she was pretty terrified. And she froze for a moment, didn't know what to do, but eventually she got up the courage to undo her cloak and stand up and tiptoe away very gently until she got a wee bit of distance between her and the sleeping wolf, and then she absolutely ran for it back to the farm. And this story of the wolf quickly kind of put the fact that she'd been asleep for half of her workday out of everybody's minds. And the word got round, and the word quickly got to Robertson, the laird at Nathro, and he made his way straight to the mill. Now, the wolf was gone by the time he got there, but there were shreds of her cloak that the wolf had ripped apart, and Robertson followed the threads of the cloak all the way along to the Catterthun Hills, and eventually he traced them back to the wolf's den. And sadly, that was the end of the last wolf in Angus. And they say that Robertson was so pleased to have made this kill that he married the servant girl, so her days of working were over as well. So that's the last wolf of Angus. Now, back to Dave.
So I quoted Simon Taylor as the honorary president of the Scottish Place Name Society, and his input into this was that, again, I received an unexpected visit from Simon. He just arrived unannounced at my door. As I say, there was a bit like the Spanish Inquisition version of the Place Name Society. So when he was asking what I'd been working on, and clearly I hadn't been working on anything, but I came up quickly with the answer that would you like to see my little collection? So I immediately took him out and showed him all the maps and the amount of notes. Needless to say, he was duly impressed. He'd never seen a collection quite like that. Again, I showed you some of the notes that Edith had actually written herself, and this is one that's then been transcribed, and it's just exactly as she would have written it. But as you can see, it's now much more legible, and it's because it's digitised, it's now searchable, so we can actually start to make use of the names and collate them in different groupings or whatever, or if you're looking for a specific one, particularly if you're looking for them, across Scotland. We do different projects where same names appear, and it's quite useful if you can actually get a derivation which fits neatly across the collection, and because of course they're obviously being done by different researchers in different contexts. That's just an example. Finhaven itself, it was one of the, I think, about 7 full pages of notes on Finhaven that Edith had done, and of course there, because you've got the history of the castle at which appears on, it was actually the tallest building, it appears on Pont's maps in Scotland, I believe, although it's now split in two, as you can see. But of course, obviously, that was the home to Earl Beardy, and there are many stories about Earl Beardy, both in at Fairhaven and, of course, at Glamis Castle. But Edith, there is, again, I'm just touching the surface of Edith's work, because there are 7 full pages of notes, but like that, you can see how she's been working back. Again, this is just an example of where she was doing her research, and to be able to do that back in the 60s, clearly she would have had to travel to Edinburgh as well. So she wasn't just going up the glens, she was clearly doing her research. And I hate to think how long it would have taken. Nowadays it would take quite a long time to research that digitally, but the time it took her to research, and that's, as I say, that's just one example, many others like that, but she then went on, as I say, to try and, she picked up everything she could, obviously, by speaking to the locals. But this is another one that, this was again, I'm just taking a wee reading from I can't find out which year this was. This is the Place Name Society's sort of newsletter, and we're just talking about different types of place names, and this is some diabolical place names in Angus and Perthshire. Clutie is one of the many old Scottish names for the devil. This comes from the name Clwt, one division of the cleft hoof. The common variant is the epithet Auld Clwts. There's a piece of land called Clwtie's Croft that's left untilled as a gift to the devil, and another Scottish euphemism for the devil is Horny or Old Horny. Juice, another name for the devil or any evil spirit. The devil appears in many Tayside place names, and indeed he seems to be particularly common in the Angus East Coast, especially. Devil's Head, Dale's Head, is an isolated stack of red sandstone on the coast above Arbroath, and nearby are his anvil, his armchair, and his letterbox, and his grindstone. The anvil is a rock in the gloomy portals of the dark cave at Arbroath Cliffs. The Deal's armchair is also in the murky portals of the dark cave. And as for the Deal's Een, beware, because they watch you from the smuggler's cave at the Arbroath Cliffs. While the devil's letterbox is a chink in the rocks through which the turmoil of waters can be seen below. The devil's grindstone can't be seen, but heard. It's a whirring noise that occurs near Auchmithie at certain times of wind and tide, and in the olden days no Auchmithie fisherman would dare to go to sea when that dreaded sound was heard. There's a devil's nap at Gichty Burn, as well as the devil's nap at Lunan and the Dale's Den at Fernell. The famous Dale's Stane is at on the River Esk at the Cortagy Kirk, and then there's another Dale's Stane at Letham. And this is locally known as the Girdle Stane. It's actually been moved, but it's still down at Letham. The Devil's Now at the Brunton, the Deal's How at Marcus, another Deal's How at the Vane. The Devil's Wind is referred to in the book The Land of the Lindsays, and the Deal's Lappy lies between Mulguys and Muldens. You have to be aware of that one because it's near the Cardinal Hole. Then there's a Horny Cross near Kirriemuir and a Horny Hoch at Glenqueich. It's an old farmhouse that lies on the western side of the Glenqueich. And there's a well next to the house, and allegedly the devil, Old Horny, would appear from the well, and since then it's been called Horny Hoch. Dooley Den is a river cut valley that allows easy access between the east and west sides of the glen. The minister was cycling along that path one day when the devil appeared to him. But the devil obviously liked this part of the glen because Dooley Den and just quite near Horny Hoch. There's Bodden John in Glen Island, which you might not recognise from the Gaelic Bodden Demon, which translates as penis of the demon. There's also the same Gaelic name in the Lara Grew, but there was a euphemistic anglicisation to Devil's Point, which was made to avoid the discomfort of Queen Victoria as she travelled through the Lara Groove. And finally, of course, there's the Devil's Elbow in Cairnwell Road to Braemar. But how many of you have heard of the Devil's Teeth, which are also there? They're the anti-war blocks that run down the glen from the actual Devil's Elbow. It's still there to this day. Anyway, that's back there.
We do enjoy the devil, but I wasn't actually going to do this story, but since we have come on to Finavon and Errol Beardy, I'll do a very quick version of one of the stories connected to him, because Finavon Castle is a very spooky place. But legend has it that Errol Beardy was a tyrant laird, basically. He was one of the Lindsay family, who don't come out of a lot of the folklore well, it has to be said. But he only really had one thing that he loved in the world, and this was a big chestnut tree in the grounds of Finavon Castle. And he would just admire this chestnut tree for hours. And the other thing that brought him joy in the world was gambling. He loved a game of cards. And, well, at the same time as Errol Beardy was the Laird of Finavon, there was a wee messenger boy who lived in that area, and he was an orphan who never had enough money to buy a pair of shoes, so he was known as Jockey Barefoot. And there was one day Jockey Barefoot was stopped by a mysterious stranger, not somebody from the local area, but he was riding a big black horse and had a fine black cloak on. And then he told Jockey that he had to get a message to Errol Beardy at Finavon Castle urgently. And so Jockey takes the letter and he goes to Finavon Castle, and he tries to get in at the back gates, the servants' entrance, but nobody's answering when he rings the bell. So Jockey decides that the only thing for it is to climb up the wall and look over the other side. But in doing this, he hurts his leg, and to help support him, he crawls over and breaks a branch from this beautiful chestnut tree. So when he goes to the door to deliver the letter, he hands it to Errol Beardy's butler, but the Errol sees him with the stick and storms over and demands to know what Jockey has done. And, well, the poor wee lad admits that he's taken the branch off the Errol's prized chestnut tree. And the Errol, as punishment for this, he has poor wee Jockey Barefoot hanged from the branches of that chestnut tree. And after that, well, the Errol, he opens the letter and sees it's an invitation to this grand dinner at Glamis Castle. And when that comes around, he's having a good time drinking and showing off to all the lairds and everyone from the neighbouring kind of places, all the great and the good. But there's one person that he doesn't recognise, and this is a stranger wearing a fine black coat, and he spotted a beautiful horse as well in the stables on his way in. So when it comes to the end of the night and there's just Errol Beardy and this stranger left, the stranger says, "Would you fancy a game of cards?" And, well, Errol Beardy, he's very drunk and he loves a game of cards, so he agrees to play cards with this stranger. And the deal that they set is that if Errol Beardy wins, he'll get this beautiful horse. But the stranger doesn't tell him what his forfeit will be if he loses. And so they play cards, and as you can expect, Errol Beardy loses dreadfully. And when he looks below the table, he sees the cloven hooves, and when he looks into the stranger's face, he sees the red eyes and the horns, and he realises he has been playing cards with the devil himself. And of course he's still in that room, and when you go and count the windows in Glamis Castle, you'll always find one more window counting from the outside than you will counting from the inside, and that is the secret room in which Earl Beardy sits for eternity, damned to play cards with the devil. And there's many other stories about what might be going on in that secret room as well. It's Glamis Castle is another place you can do a whole event around. But poor wee Jockey Barefoot never quite managed to get peace either. There's a story that said that if you were walking home at night in the area around Finhaven, sometimes a wee boy wearing no shoes would fall into step with you as you went, and if you were walking with him when you came to the Lemno barn, he would burst into flames and disappear. So that's one of the many stories about Finhaven Castle.
So, where are we going now with this? It's simply a question of sort of what research can we do for the information that we now have. Where can we take it? One of the things that's come up really is I'm quite interested in Edith's Notes on St Arnold's Seat, which is just up behind Tannadice. Again, there's loads of stories about who this St Arnold was. It's certainly been a monstrous cairn, but the cairn has been dismantled and used largely for dikes up on the hill now. But it was at one time an enormous cairn, and it's still quite a prominent feature in the landscape. But I had never come across any connection with anywhere else. But as part of this information coming out about Edith's Notes, it turns out that I found a letter in the files that Edith had referred to Colin Gibson, again going back to their connections, and as a result of that, I've now been given a letter from Andrew Landrum, Dr. Andrew Landrum, who was a friend of mine who lived in Kirriemuir, but he's now moved north. But his father was Professor A.C. Landrum, Andrew Landrum as well, of the pathology department. Dundee University, it was Queen's College at the time. And he had obviously been corresponding with Colin Gibson as part of Colin Gibson's Nature Diary. And this is in 1961 again. And he's saying, Colin is telling Professor Landrum, oddly enough, I was thinking about doing a nature diary on the Lower Northern next week. You ask about St Arnold's Seat. It used to be St Ennan's Seat. And it's exactly the same conversation, and I do believe that all three of them must have been having this conversation, because Colin Gibson goes on about Adamnan was 7th century and had the church at Tannadice, Colm's Well, Columba at Shiel Hill, and the former chapels at Colm stood alongside the Shiel Hill Bridge. They were probably named by Adamnan. And the cairn of St Arnold's Seat was, and this is where he confirms that it was pillaged to some extent by the Laird of Redhugh, Haig by name I think, about the middle of the 19th century, which is when they would be doing the enclosures. It seems to me, although I've never got right to it, there's a connection between St Arnold's Seat and St Orlan's Stone, which is 7th century in type, a mile north of Glamis. And this is where he makes the link between St Arnold's Seat and this is, I got in touch with Gillian Zealand, so she looked back her notes and it just confirms this letter that this was the 4th of November, and it appeared in the Courier on the Saturday the 11th of November 1961. So you can, it gives an insight into how Colin Gibson was working and networking with the people in the area. Colin wrote a good number of articles over the years on place names as a regular of his nature diary feature. But I found it an interesting connection that they'd all known each other, and the fact that Gillian was, well, she was fascinated to find out that that was the connection as well. So she started looking up some of the nature diaries in 61 and up through the 70s, because at the end of this letter to Professor Landrum, Colin asks, "Did you ever hear the Deal's How in Glenogle?" I mentioned that the Deal's names earlier, but she's Gillian Zealand comes back to me and said that she's that's the nature of it, but she hasn't come up with any further information about the Deal's How. So she's certainly been looking at Edith Marnie's place names research, and obviously equally she came across that galloping granny in her father's notes as one of his main features. So it's interesting to see how these things are developing. That's St Donald's Stone, which is, as I say, it's near to Lambs. It's not a very clear picture, but it's the only Pictish stone with a boat. 1, 2, 3 people sitting in a little boat. There is another one at Weems Caves, but this is the only one that shows an actual, well, it'd be a rowboat. And as you can see, it's sitting in open countryside because, of course, the Forfar Loch was drained in 1740, and this now sits proudly in the middle of farmland. So, as I say, we're coming across this name, and this is just a note about the sort of the research and the fact that I've got this letter from Andrew Landrum. I mean, we're still coming across various notes. In fact, one that I came across just last week was written to Edith Marnie, who was obviously down in Glasgow at the time. It's to a Glasgow address, but this is in 1969, so this must have been when she went down to start her studies. But it's written from Moyer Stormouth Darling, who was the laird at Lednathie up Glen Prosen, and he's writing to Edith saying, "Thank you very much for your letter. I'll certainly be here on the 10th of May. Would you like to come up here? We could discuss names in the Glen. Would 4 o'clock suit you? I had a man from the Sunday Post here yesterday, and he wanted to write something about place names at Lednathie. I gave him what information I had, but fear much of it was inaccurate. His article should be in Sunday's Angus edition." And Erin kindly looked it up, and I don't have it here with me tonight, but we have a copy of that article. Again, it just shows the way in which this information was being disseminated sort of through the Edith's marvellous collection. I've been in touch with the family, really, well, I call them the Wild Swimming Brothers. This is Edith Marnie's great-grandsons, and they're known as the Wild Swimming Brothers because they're Edith Wild's family, Callum, Robbie and Jack. And when she died, they did a memorial swim down Loch Broom. They travelled up from England, in fact travelled from all over, but they met up at Loch Broom and did a memorial swim to the graveyard to honour their granny, the lady who was shown in the boat earlier that I knew. And I've kept in touch with them, and Callum replied last year when I sent, because they had no knowledge of that obituary, and he said he shared it with the family in the message. So it's a happy ending in a way, and really it's this is a celebration of Edith Marnie's life and work. Quite an amazing woman. and her and her daughter shared the last 10 years of their lives at that idyllic cottage. In fact, I've got a number of stories that I got from her daughter as the things that she had done, and she was still rowing across the loch at age 85. So yes, quite an amazing woman anyway. I'm really grateful to Edith Marnie for collecting the notes, and for Edith Wild for preserving them, and for the family to allow us to make use of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think, as Dave says, I think this is the beginning of something as we start getting into Edith's research and thinking about all the, just from looking through her notes, there's a lot more folklore and things going on in there than what we've been able to cover today. So I'm quite interested to see how we can develop these connections and bring this work back into the world. And I think it's important to remember Edith and her work, and the work that people who remember names and stories and the lore of places do to help us kind of keep a sense of place and of the world that we live in. So we've got a wee bit of time now for questions, if anybody would like to ask anything. Yes?
You told us the story of Dexter Susie. We didn't link it back to why the house was called Baxter's House, or did I miss that?
Wait, no, you didn't miss it. There was no real explanation of why it was called Baxter's House, which is, interesting in itself, that it's just kind of become associated with this totally different person who lived there. There may well be an explanation to be found somewhere, of course.
Do we know much about her early life in Dundee? Which school she went to and that kind of thing?
I don't... Dave?
Relatively little. I picked up that she was very musical, I understand, and she worked in Medvin and Simpson's shop in Dundee as well, but in quite what capacity. As I say, I've heard various stories of the activities and parties that took place at Pitcarroll Place, but really not knowing what come of this when I was speaking to her daughter. I mean, given that I only ever met her once, to try and get a full family history it wasn't really on my agenda.
So my family history has taken me to Clackabrain and a few different generations of my ancestors from the land there. I was just wondering, because you said that Edith's sort of hypothesis of why it was called that came from a woman's stone, I think it was, but then Adam had said that maybe wasn't quite accurate. I was just wondering if you knew anything about why, if there was any other hypothesis of why it's called that, or where that name comes from, or if Adam had said there could have been another source for that.
The woman's stone was simply a quote that she had written, and that, as I say, the only reason I used it was, I don't know in what context she was using it, but I thought, if you're going to speak to a women's festival, I couldn't really make another direct connection with place names readily anyway.
I think we'll stick with that because that's quite a nice name.
I mean, back in the band, it's just a generic term.
Yeah.
What the woman would have used the stone for, because I don't know where it was, it wasn't one of the ones that she'd annotated a number to. It was just one of her notes. I mean, she had, as I say, there was a lot of unreferenced notes, which she'd just been using as working documents, and she'd obviously picked that up and. She referred to it, she questioned whether it would have been like a washing stone or a place where women met. I mean, you had what were often called parliament stones, where the local community would simply, it was a known meeting point, but they shouldn't enlarge on
what or where that actual stone was. But I suspect if we looked at that Clachnaban, I think you would find them pretty well scattered all over Scotland.
Are there any other questions? Doesn't seem so. So I'll finish by just reminding everyone that there is another Abertay Historical Society event taking place a week today, and that will be in our usual venue of the Dalhousie building at University of Dundee, and this will be Christopher Davey speaking about the history of Camperdown Park. And there's lots more Dundee Women's Festival events to come as well. There are programmes out in the library for you to collect. And we have some wee feedback postcards here as well, so if you have a moment to fill one of them out on your way out, that is much appreciated. Thank you all very much for coming, and we hope to be telling you more about place names and folklore and Edith Marnie in the future. Thank you.